Jerome. Jerome was born Eusebius Sophronius and was the most learned of the fathers of the Western Church. He was born about the year 342 AD at Stridonius, a small town at the head of the Adriatic Sea, near the episcopal city of Aquileia. His father, a Christian, took care that his son was well instructed at home, and then he sent him to Rome, where the young man's teacher was the famous pagan grammarian Donatus and Victorinus. The Christian rhetorician. He became sound and adept in Latin and Greek. He read the literatures of those languages with great pleasure. His aptitude for oratory was such that he may have considered law as a possible career. He acquired many worldly ideas, made little effort to check his pleasure-loving instincts, and lost most of his piety that had been instilled in him at home. Yet, in spite of the pagan and the hedonistic influences around him, Jerome, baptized by Pope Liberius in 360. He was baptized in 360. After 3 years at Rome, Jerome's intellectual curiosity led him to explore the world and other parts of Christianity. He left his home and was accompanied by his boyhood friend, and he made friends amongst the monks of the monastery. There, notably Rufinus. Then, still accompanied by his friend, he traveled to Gaul. He now renounced all of his worldly pursuits and dedicated himself wholeheartedly to God. Eager to build up his religious library, the young scholar copied St. Hilary's books on his commentaries on the Psalms and got other literary and religious treasures. He returned to Stridonius later and settled in Aquileia. The bishop had cleared the church there of the plague of Arianism that had drawn so many eminent men to it. Amongst those whom Jerome formed relationships with was Chromatius, whom later was venerated as a saint. The famous theologian Rufinus, at first his close friend, was at first a close friend and later on became a bitter enemy. Jerome made enemies as well as friends. He spent some years in scholarly studies in Aquileia. Then, in search of a more perfect solitude, he turned towards the east with his friends Innocent, Helidorus, and Hylas, a freed slave. He started overland for Syria. One of the ways they visited Athens, Bithynia, Galatia, Pontus, Cappadocia, and Sicilia. What made his name so famous, his critical labor on the scriptures. The church regards him as the greatest doctor of the Bible, clarifying the word of God. He had the best available aids for such an undertaking, living where the remains of many biblical places and names and customs all were available to him. These combined to give him a more vivid view of exactly what the Bible was all about. He hired a Jewish scholar by the name of Ananias, who came to teach him by night, lest other Jews would learn of it. As a man of prayer, purity of heart, he had been mainly spent in study, contemplation. Jerome was prepared to be a sensitive interpreter of spiritual things. Now, he undertook to translate most of the books of the Old Testament directly from the Hebrew. The friends and scholars who urged him in his task realized the superiority of a version made directly from the Word of God or the original language. It was needed too to help supply the argument with the Jews who only recognized the Hebrew text. He began with the books of Kings and went on with the rest of the books. When he found that part of the book of Tobias and part of Daniel had been composed in Chaldaic, he set himself to learn that language, that very difficult language, as well. More than once, he became very wearisome and almost gave up the task of producing this Bible. But he stuck to his guns, and of course, later he produced a Latin Bible that we know today as the Vulgate. The Vulgate. The only books not included in the translation of Jerome are the books of the Maccabees and a few others. In the 16th century, the Great Council of Trent pronounced Jerome's Vulgate the authentic and authoritative Latin text of the Catholic Church, implying a preference for it above the original text or above versions in other languages.